her presentation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mohammed. I haven't been able to figure this, but I'm requesting my colleague Soumya to just share the presentation. So I will be, just to give you an introduction again, I'm Anusha, I'm from the India Hub, and I represent the organization called Praxis. I'm a journalist by training. I have been in the development sector for the last 10 years. And before that, I've also had some experience working on some guidebooks for a few destinations across the country. And I'm a student of history. And it has been fascinating to listen to both the speakers before me. So on that note, I'll just begin with talking about heritage and introducing you to a little bit about the Indian heritage. When we talk about Indian heritage, we recently had celebrated our Independence Day on the 15th of August, and we had a Google Doodle on that day. So what was interesting for me that almost 73 years after independence, I learned about a new musical instrument. So just if you go from left to right, the instruments here are a tutari, a shehnai, a dhol, the veena, sarangi, and bansuri. They're all different forms of musical instruments, and one of these, the tutari, was something I had never really heard of before. And also, if you notice, each of these musical instruments is presented in a different style of art. Just to let colleagues from Iraq know about these. These are the first one is like a kalamkari art form. The second is Madhubani. The third is Varli. The fourth is Gond art. Then there's Fard and Pichwai. So even among the types of art, I had learned something new after being in, after knowing about India and being interested in its culture and heritage. So if we look at what exactly heritage means, what is the heritage that we celebrate and showcase? If we go to the next slide and to think about the definition of heritage. So heritage is basically the dictionary meaning would be any valued object or qualities like cultural traditions. It could be natural beauty, historical monuments, and anything that has been passed down from generation to generation. So if we look at it, it seems very simple. Inherent in the concept of heritage is the fact that it has been inherited. It has been transferred from one generation to the next generation. And the second thing is, it is something of value. So it is owned. And that is why it is passed on through the generations. So if we look at the Ministry of Culture of the Government of India's website, it lists close to 80 or more than 80 odd forms of intangible cultural heritage. And I'd invite all of you to actually visit the site and see um, uh, many of these art forms and many of these oral traditions that have been listed there. Because even for me, it was much of it was revelation, things you have heard of, but not necessarily spent much time on what exactly it is.
It's like one article or multiple articles,
I would just request
okay.
if you could.
And you're writing it for various
So
public.
if we can, then so basically, if we look at these why are these different art forms there on this website? So largely, if we see, it is
Okay.
a part of a journey trying to showcase the rich and diverse heritage of the country, to document the cultural pluralism that India
Yeah,
is
I think
known for.
you have said it all in more ways than one in terms of.
And then if you look at,
Excuse me, Mr. Tom, if you mind, can you close the microphone?
I think I
Mr.
think
Tom?
yeah, I think he
Okay, go
has.
ahead.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Anush.
Sure. So just like a few questions that occurred to me even when Dr. Al-Hassani was talking about Baghdad downtown. It is about the question that why don't we know anything about monuments? That was a question that he raised. So I would like to give a different response to that. So my thought is, it is not that simple. It's a question of how heritage is determined, who determines what is which thing is of what value, and why it gets inherited, and when it gets owned by someone. Just to like move to the next slide, historian Romila Thapar, she the next slide. The historian Romila Thapar, she says that heritage is actually a possession. It could be an object or an idea that is expressed in an act and is inherited from the past. But when it is claimed as an act of heritage, it can be used to define and identity, any identity in the present. So as by extension, an object of heritage, it can assume meanings centuries after it has been in existence. Maybe it has been there for many decades, but nobody has known about it. And maybe it becomes known or becomes claimed as a heritage because one ruler or one collective or somebody felt the need to claim that heritage, even though it has been there. Just to give you an example of that, there is what is called the previous slide only. There is on the left-hand side of this slide, you will see what is Ashoka's pillar. Now, Ashoka was a famous emperor of India who was there millennia before in the 3rd century BC. Now, he is very important to the Indian culture and historical context because his Ashokan pillar, one of the Ashokan pillars is what has been adopted by the Indian government as the emblem of India. So as an emperor who has so much value, it would be assumed that Ashoka's heritage would be something that everybody is aware about, and he has always been a famous person. But it is not so. For example, this Ashokan pillar that you see on the slide, it was currently it is there in the Allahabad fort, and he would have got this inscribed in probably sometime in 263 BC. But over the years, like 6 centuries later, there was another emperor who came across, and that was Samudragupta, and he had this inscription. He got more things written on this inscription. So while Ashoka's initial pillar spoke about the principle of non-violence, of tolerance, and of ethical governance, Samudragupta's inscriptions talk largely about the fact about how to be a great emperor who can conquer many kingdoms. So it was like it was inscribed with something that was diametrically opposite to what Ashoka intended to say. In fact, until 1915, as recently like just a century before, it was not even known that this pillar was attributed to Ashoka. Nobody even knew about it. So someone who's of so much importance to the Indian context, to Indian philosophy and Indian heritage was just in oblivion for all these years. And who knows, maybe in future it is possible that a state that values martial prowess more than the spirit of non-violence or tolerance that Ashoka or even Mahatma Gandhi talk about may eclipse the heritage of his pillars with something completely different. That is something that we do not know about. That said, it is important to note that state is not the only one who decides what is heritage or what is culture. Any group, any community can pass down its heritage of value over generations. And collectives that define heritage themselves undergo time through change through time, through space. And as the definition of a collective changes, what it values also changes. So that is how heritage moves from one place to another. Again, collectives are not monoliths. So there can be multiple heritage in the same space, in the same time, or even among cohabitants. To give you another example, there is in the western state of Odisha, western Indian state of Odisha, there is a tribe called the Dongriya Kons. They are an indigenous community, and they believe that the mountain, the Niyamgiri mountain, which is where they live, is their god, is their deity, and they pray to this god. Not many people knew about it. When they came to know about it, why they came to know about it is because this community came into direct conflict with a big corporate like Vedanta, and who wanted to mine this god of theirs to get bauxite. So it is a case of conflict that actually brought out this heritage of a particular community within India, of this indigenous tribe within India. The next slide, please. Now, talking about something that would be very familiar to most of you, if you look at the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is very intrinsically linked to Iraq's heritage over millennia, it became, wittingly or unwittingly, it became a part of global heritage as when it was seen as the oldest written piece of literature. So it is not that a heritage of one place gets restricted to that place. It could also be possible that a global heritage gets built by like people across the globe wanting to take a share of it or wanting to take ownership of it. So with that, I would just like to go a little bit more into the contested heritage that we talk about. The next slide. Here, we'll first talk about what are certain dominant traditions and little traditions to give you a little bit of context into what I'm talking about. There is bound to be contestation when there are multiple heritages. To give you an example, many of you might have heard about the most famous of all epics, or what I could call the epic, that is Ramayana. It is supposed to have hundreds of versions, hundreds of tellings of how the story of Ramayana unfolded. It is told from different lenses, from the perspectives of different characters within the Ramayana itself. It's about like you have Ramayana told from the lens of Rama, the main character, or his wife Sita, who was abducted, and over whom the entire battle with Ravana, called a demon king, was fought, or by Surpanaka, the sister of Ravana, whose mutilation is believed to have set this entire incidents in motion. So there are many tellings of these various incidents in Ramayana. But what we often hear is the Ramayana that is very specific to certain forms that talk about Rama as the ideal man, or as the god, the ideal god, and Sita as an ideal woman. In fact, there are many ways Ramayana is celebrated across the country. For example, there is something called the Raman tradition. The photo on the right depicts the Raman tradition of Uttarakhand, one of the hilly states of India, where the Ramayana is played out in the form of rural ritual theater over a period of 10 days. Within this performance, people take different sides within their, like some of them are take the side of Rama's story, others of Ravana's story, and the story is played out over 10 days. But what happens is this, even though this is part of our intangible heritage list and now also part of the UNESCO intangible heritage from India, it is not very well known. So the version of heritage that gets cherry picked and celebrated also has a lot to do with what are the dominant social norms and needs. That does not mean that the rest cease to exist. They come to fore one day as the claimed heritage of the subalterns. So on the photo on the right, if we talk about it, there is another festival that is celebrated in across the country in different ways. So this is again a subaltern tradition that is celebrated by a tribe in Jharkhand, tribes in Jharkhand and West Bengal, two states in eastern India, which are basically they deify the demon king who is supposed to be slayed by the goddess, in honor of whom the festival is celebrated. Similarly, some indigenous tribes also celebrate Ravana, whom we just spoke about. They think that he is their god, and they actually observe his martyrdom when the rest of the country is celebrating his death and like the Rama's victory over him. So if we move further, like a lot of these contestations can also be seen in how some heritage becomes taken from a community to which it belonged, and it is transformed and given a different sanitized picture and presented and exported across the world. For example, there is the art form called Sadir dance, which is what, if you would have heard of Bharatnatyam dance form, which is what Sadir was based on. Now, Sadir dance form was basically performed by Devdasis, women who were dedicated to the service of temples. These women were called like rubies of the palace, and they were feted for their performance. And what happened was because of the association with being with a lower class, lower caste, of which these women belong to, there was an attempt to take this out of their heritage and remodel it in the 1930s and 40s as Bharatnatyam, and export it to a market that today, like across the world, you would heard of Bharatnatyam performances. People from different countries take this, and it is basically a sanitized version of a dance performance that is presented. So one of the historians, Swarnamalya Ganesh, she talks about 20th century dissociation of dance from economic employment of the Devdasis, and moved it into a noble hobby or passion of women who could afford to have it. So it was now seen as art just for the sake of art. And people who did this are now celebrated as exponents of Bharatnatyam. For example, Rukmini Devi and Krishna Iyer. So again, a subaltern art form just disappears completely. Just to add to that, when we are talking about the appropriation of heritage in these instances, how dominant narratives tend to sanitize subaltern heritage to suit an agenda of nationalism, nation building, erasing linkages that will be problematic for them in is what comes across. And this is definitely something that has to be acceptable to the market. To drive home the point, I would just like to make another, add a point that when the last Sadir dance performer, her name is Muthu Kannamal, when she tried, when the Devdasi Act was passed and it was outlawed, the tradition was outlawed, she tried starting a dance school and trying to teach children, girls how to dance. But people would not send their children, daughters to her place because of her association with a tradition that was seen as disgraceful or seen as lowly. So that said, the next slide, please. That said, that having a heritage is not necessarily a guarantee of dignity. To give you some examples, the dance form that you see here in the slide is the Kalbelia dance. It is noted among the 80 odd intangible heritage listed on the Government of India's website. But just a few days ago, police training in some part of central India was talking about how Kalbelias need to be, how their work with soft policing needs to be done with Kalbelias because they're actually thieves. Or so these are those identities, these are those stereotypes that get pronounced rather than the original, their heritage that they have been famous for. Another example related to this is the transgender community. Form of their performance known as Kinnar Geet. The Kinnar Geet is again on the intangible cultural heritage list, but the plight of transgenders in the Indian context is very well known. And just yesterday we had a webinar where there were trans women who spoke about the challenges that they face because their identities are not accepted by various laws. And there is an attempt to
Anusha, you have 5
Yeah.
minutes.
Sure. And there is an attempt to impose certain casteist norms and patriarchal norms on them. So where we are talking, what we're talking about here is the pressure of declaring something as heritage, like having a Kalberia or Kinargeet as heritage. It is something that becomes determined by politics, by forces of capital and social norms. And they are seen as dissociating communities from the culture and heritage and setting up things about what is good heritage, what is good bad heritage. So these are certain challenges that we need to be aware about. Then comes the question of who controls this heritage, because across the world there have been examples in history of conflict over heritage, and this can be like the American destruction of Iraqi archaeological sites, Taliban's destruction of the Bamiyan Buddhas, or the British colonizers' loot of India's treasures. Within all this, even within the Indian context, there are recent controversies about the Babri Masjid and the Ram Janmabhoomi you might have heard about, or the debate about over which language in India is the sovereign language. So control over heritage, the conflict over heritage, these have often taken overt and subverted forms. And there have been attempts to erase pluralism or try and enforce majoritarianism, to construct some kind of an imagined heritage that serves the purpose of the imagined communities that Benedict Anderson spoke about, and to feed into a nationalist agenda. Of late, there are also struggles within how a Durga Puja or a Dasera, the two festivals that I spoke about earlier, how they should be celebrated uniformly across the country, whether it should be vegetarian, whether it should be non-vegetarian, whether meat can be eaten or not. So these are challenges that will continue to exist, and these are some things we need to recognize. I would like to leave you all with a set of few thoughts. The next slide. So the next slide, please. So a few questions for introspection. I would like to leave you all with this, mainly looking at, will little traditions become appropriated by dominant narratives and lose their original forms? Will heritage become commercialized and become a slave of the market? will the celebration of claimed heritage help in actually building some kind of identity for the communities, or will it just become a lip service to pluralism? And who will ultimately control the heritage that we are talking about? So these are certain questions I would like to leave you with. Thank you so much.